It's an accepted fact in the NFL that most quarterbacks take time to develop, and that is undeniably true. But still, after 1, 2, or 3 seasons, sometimes you have to make a decision as to whether or not to just get rid of that quarterback, and it can often be a very difficult decision to make. One of the reasons why it's so difficult is because we're mostly just guessing here. We're mostly just saying, do I think this guy is going to improve or do I think he's not? And it's hard to totally know. But what you can do is look at what the stats say for who they were that year. So here's what I did. I went back and I decided to rank every single quarterback drafted in the first round since 2006. So this is everyone on the board. The one exception is you see there's no Tim Tebow there because of his weirdness and how he left the NFL. I just wasn't sure if I should include him. I felt like that would skew the data, so I decided to not put him on there. And yeah, they're in 4 categories: great, good, have some value, and not worth much / anything. And you could disagree with, any select person. I think that some people might have Ryan Tannehill in good. Some people might have Jared Goff in great. But as a whole, I think this will do an okay job at, my evaluation of who I think they are. I think that most people will agree this is, at least 95% correct. I know some people are going to say, how could you call Sam Bradford, Joe Flacco, and Jay Cutler good? But remember, I'm not talking about where they are right now, just where they got to at a certain point in their career. And, it's a bit misleading as well because some people like Josh Freeman and also Robert Griffin had good seasons but then fell off. They're still not worth much / anything. One season doesn't really change everything. So that was step 1, but it was only one step. Then what I had to do was go back and really figure out how good these quarterbacks were when they played for their first 3 seasons. The issue with that, it's kind of difficult to tell exactly how good someone is. I mean, my opinion of who is good is different than someone else's. So how do I get perfect data for this? I decided to use 2 things. I used passer rating, which is, I think, a fine generic stat, but it's not perfect. It does sort of take how good your team is into consideration, but still, that's what I used for one of them. The other one I used was Pro Football Focus, which is also why I went back to 2006, because that's as far back as their data goes, and I used their overall player grades. I know Pro Football Focus, some people love it, some people hate it. I actually like it. I think it's pretty good, and again, it's just someone's opinion on this, so agree or disagree, but the data actually backs it up pretty well that Pro Football Focus has kind of nailed it. Like, watch, using what you see there. So for Pro Football Focus, really what you want to do is you want to get your player grade above 60 your rookie season. This is just rookie seasons, not overall for the first 3 seasons. If your overall grade is under 60, you're probably going to be a bust. Actually, over a 60% chance you're going to be a bust. If you have it between 60 and 70, then you're probably not going to be a bust. It says 0%. That's obviously misleading because, there was only 10 players who finished in that category. So you're going to see a bit of some wonky stats like that. But again, it's the whole data that's important, not just individual pieces. And if you get a grade of above 70, the numbers are pretty good for you. There's a very good chance you're going to end up being a great quarterback, or at least a good quarterback. There always is a chance of a bust no matter what, but it looks pretty good if you can just get that 70 rating. For a quarterback's second year, what I had to do was sort of move the stats up a little bit, because in your second year, you have to be better. You are kind of in a race against time to some degree, and you look really 60 or below, you're almost definitely going to be a bust at that point. I mean, it's very rare that you end up having a good season after a season that poorly in your second year. You also have, 60 through 70, then you're probably going to have some value. 70 through 80, you're probably going to be good, and 80 plus, you're probably going to be great. So there is some pretty clear examples of the better you are your second year, you're probably going to end up being good for the rest of your career as well. And then for your third year, it's more of the same. Again, the worse you do, bigger chance you are of being a bust. So these are the numbers right here, and I find it interesting. I also did the same for passer rating. As you see, this is the first season for passer rating. You notice that, again, the chart's now kind of flipped because lower numbers are better in this chart. But, you're probably going to be great is what it says if you can finish in the top 15 in passer rating in your first season. Also, yes, top 15. I did it by rankings instead of by how good your passer rating was, just because things have gotten more quarterback-centric in the past 15 years. And you also see why there is some issues with using passer rating. It ends up being some value. Is it for 16 through, all the way through? because, passer rating is just a bit more difficult to figure out exactly and to have more exact measurements, which is why I prefer a Pro Football Focus rating, although I did want to include a second stat, so that's why I went with passer rating. In Season 2, there is no great, it's just good, some value, and then bust for that one. And again, I sort of gave more groupings there just simply because, there's more people that have been spread out, whereas a rookie, usually you're going to have, sort of one of two rankings. And finally, third season, again, it's good, or bust are the averages for this one. But also, I should mention, even if it says good for two different categories, it is a better chance of being great if it's 1 through 9 than if you're 10 through 20, which makes sense. So I don't think I'm necessarily really catching anybody by surprise. I think this is something that people probably had a pretty good idea of. The better you are your first, second, or third season, obviously there's a better chance you're going to be great later on. But really what I find this chart interesting is it can sort of, you can use it to see where these guys are now that have just entered the league and see what their projection is. So first, let's start off with the players projected to be great. And I'm using the Pro Football Focus projections to be great because, again, sometimes in passer rating, it only goes up to good. You have three-year players, Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson. I think that all checks out, seems logical. You also have Kyler Murray as a second-year player. Again, makes sense. And Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert are both projected great. The one interesting thing, I guess, would be Burrow, since he had a lower passer rating. His projection there is to just be a some value quarterback. But again, this is kind of where you sort of use your head and you say, I think Joe Burrow is going to be better than just some value. I trust the Pro Football Focus more than the passer rating one. 2 guys that people are talking about, maybe they're guys you should get rid of, Tua and Daniel Jones. They're both, according to PFF, projected for good. But also, if you look at the passer rating, Daniel Jones has a projection of not worth much or anything, whereas Tua has a projection of just some value. And also keep in mind who good is. Sam Bradford, Teddy Bridgewater, that's kind of the category I'm putting them in. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a bust, but it also means you're probably not going to end up being a superstar quarterback. For the some value quarterbacks, we have Drew Lock and Gardner Minshew. This makes sense. Both of these guys are, decent. They're good. They're not necessarily going to be superstars. I could totally see both of these guys ending up being a high-tier backup / low-tier starter. And also, again, you look at the projection for passer rating, Lock is projected for not worth much / anything, whereas Minshew he has a projection of good. So that might be a deal breaker as well, where if you're a fan of the Patriots, let's say, you might take a flyer on Gardner Minshew. And finally, the bust, I think that the two middle ones are obvious, Josh Rosen and Dwayne Haskins. They're both no longer even on their team that they were drafted with. And then top, you have Sam Darnold, which I know some people say, hey, it was the system. If you look through the numbers, the system doesn't really change that much. If you play in a better system, obviously that can help. But if you've had 3 seasons, you're probably not going to get much better. And maybe that's because you got ruined by the system when you first entered the league. But nevertheless, it would be an anomaly if Sam Darnold ends up being anything better than a complete bust. That's not to say that it can't happen, but it seems unlikely. And finally, the bottom one, this is Jalen Hurts. I meant to mention this a bit earlier, but you notice I included a couple quarterbacks that weren't first rounders in this chart, which honestly probably means that you should think less as opposed to more, because you would assume that if you were great in college, there's a better chance of you being great in the NFL, even after a bad season. But yeah, I included Hurts, Gardner Minshew, and Drew Lock as my non-first round picks in this grouping. But Hurts, clearly, this doesn't look so good. The projection is not worth much / anything for Pro Football Focus. His projection for some value in passer rating isn't exactly tremendous. But, listen, what I said was you got to try to clear that 60-point mark in Pro Football Focus. Hurts just barely missed it. And so that's where I think the interesting decision-making comes in. Because that's what the analytics say, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to work out that way. Josh Allen was projected to clearly be a bust before this season, and now he's looking like he's a superstar quarterback. So, there still is that difficult decision-making to be made. And while I do think that if all else is equal, you should just go by this chart and sort of say, well, if it says he's probably going to be a bust, I should move on from him. I think that you probably shouldn't re-sign Sam Darnold if you're the Jets. But that doesn't mean that Sam Darnold isn't going to someday be a superstar quarterback. That is absolutely possible. It's just very rare for it to happen. And what you do is you look at what the numbers say, and you then use that to make your decision. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you just do what the numbers say. I think there's a very clear difference. And, when people ask, am I a big analytics guy? I am, but I don't think you should just follow them without thinking about anything. For example, the Tua stuff. I find that to be incredibly interesting. Do you move off of Tua? Well, his projection is probably good to some value. His PFF says good. His passer rating says some value. And I think that you keep that guy because if you draft a quarterback, you expect it to take a couple of years. And I think that after 3 years, he probably will end up being a good quarterback, a Teddy Bridgewater type. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a superstar quarterback, but he'll probably be solid. To me, that's analytics' job. It's just giving you the baseline, saying what is he probably going to be? Okay, probably going to be, Jay Cutler, although very different quarterbacks, but that kind of value. And then you say, okay, well, if I think he's going to be that guy, then what do I do with that? And that's where the debate comes in. Of if you keep Tua, you're probably going to have a solid quarterback, which is good. You would like to have a good quarterback. You would certainly take that. I think that, the good quarterbacks, Jared Goff's on that list. So it's not like they're all just like, middling guys. There's good players on that list. And you would take Jared Goff absolutely with their defense. The flip side, though, is that if you move off of him and go with a Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's kind of already in the have some value to good range, you don't even have to worry about it. Or if you can trade for Deshaun Watson, you should absolutely do that because he's already in the great range. But then the question becomes, how much are you willing to give up? It's an interesting decision, and the analytics can't make the decision for you. They can just make it easier, in my opinion. So that's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know. What are your thoughts on a video like this? Do you like this kind of, unique thing? I figured it'd be fun to make a video, do some data. I love doing this stuff, but I hope you guys enjoy it. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.